Misty, I really want to thank you for taking the time to join us here today. It's a pleasure and an honor to have you with us. Before we get started in the conversation, what I'd like to do is provide some background both on our company and also let Misty have an opportunity to give some background on G3 Canada Limited. So Navvia is a company that was founded in 1999 as a business process consultancy. And while doing that work, we developed a product that has now become the Navvia Process Designer. This tool allowed us to save a lot of time, a lot of energy, and actually made our consulting teams a lot more productive. Fast forward a number of years, we actually exited the consulting business to focus solely on our software product. If you want to learn more about the product, you can do so by going to g2.com, which is a peer-to-peer software review site, and you can check out some of the fabulous reviews we have. Misty, why don't we take an opportunity to learn a little bit about your company?
Thank you. So G3 Canada Limited operates a network of facilities mostly in Western Canada. Our company was created in 2015 and has grown to 18 locations that set the standards for fast and efficient movement of grain, and a network of port facilities and terminals in Eastern and one in Western Canada. We have changed the business of how grain is moved more quickly. We are able to unload trucks in less than 5 minutes, as well as load a loop of rail cars within probably 12 hours, I would say, which is way ahead of the rest of the industry. It's been a really exciting company to join, and I'm happy to be here and talk to you all.
I'm sure there's a lot of process that goes into those fabulous productivity gains that you've seen, right?
Yeah.
Well, speaking of process, what I want to do is just set the stage a little bit for the discussion. So on our website, we have a number of blog posts on business process management, and this represents sort of a synopsis or basically a high-level definition of how we view business process management at Navvia. So it's a set of skills and methods that companies use to examine end-to-end processes with the goal of making them better. So business processes are really strategic and operational assets for every company. And processes really need to be understood and actively managed if you're going to create sustainable value. In today's world, business process management is really the blueprint for digital transformation because it gives you a really sense of where you are, where you want to go, and allows you to basically transform your organization, much in the way that G3 is transforming the way that they move grain across Canada. So to kick off today's session, what I'd like to do is have Catherine put up a poll question, just to get a sense from the audience where everyone is in respect to business process management. So the question goes, does your organization have a formal business process management program? And the answers that you can choose from include, yes, we have a center of excellence that drives continuous process innovation across the organization. Process initiatives are project-based and resourced accordingly. Process management is left to the various departments with inconsistent results across the organization. And there's little to no focus on process management at our company. We're reactive at best. So we'll just give, we got about 25% of the people participated. We'll just let this go for a moment or so. Now, Catherine, do you see the actual results coming in on my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Let me see.
We got about 60% of participants responding. Right. And we'll just give it another 5 seconds and then we'll close down the poll. All right, let's just go with what the results we have now. So it looks like 38% say they have a center of excellence that drives continual process innovation. I think that's awesome. I mean, without focus, it's really hard to get your consistent benefits and results from business process management. And having a center of excellence really gives you that necessary focus. 19% say that process initiatives are project-based and resourced accordingly. I mean, that's good, but I think without that overall view of process, it's because processes are interconnected, right? One process is often the input to another process. And without looking at everything from the big picture, you could perhaps miss some opportunities for improvement. 33%, which is around a third, says that process management is left to the various departments with inconsistent results across the organization. And 10% says there's little to no focus on process management. So thank you for sharing this with us. I mean, just sets the stage a little bit as to who the audience is, and we'll be able to adjust the conversation accordingly. So let me shut that off and move on to the next slide. So the way we're going to do this is we have a series of questions that that we'll bring up. I encourage everyone out in the audience today to pose questions. We're happy to take questions as we go through the presentation. We're also saving some time at the end of today's conversation to follow up with any additional questions. So the first question for you, Misty, is can you please speak to the process management team at G3? How is it organized? Where does it report into? Just some background on how you're structured.
Sure. So at G3, we have a process management team, which is currently called the process team. They all report to me. We are part of our technology development and services team, so IT. We're embedded at that level. So I report to the Vice President of Technology Development and Services, and I have 4 process analysts as well as basically a business analyst who is doing some of the work to move some of the processes and process improvements forward.
Do you find that that you're reporting into the right level in the organization?
That's a good question. Yes, because we're a fairly lean and flat organization. I personally don't care who I report to. I have, I have the ability to have influence with all the executive and all, at all levels of the organization. So I'm not too worried about it. I think technically, would it be in its own reporting structure? Yeah, that would be great, but it works fine for me, and I have an excellent manager who helps move the things forward and who is really bought into process. Also, as you mentioned, process management is a huge part of digital transformation. So I think the alignment makes sense.
The alignment to IT. And I guess where I was coming from with that question, Misty, was also, do you feel like it really was one to sponsorship and influence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like you have the right influence to really make changes and improvements in the organization? So you see, it sounds like you report high enough into the organization
I
to get
do.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly. We do have a question coming in from David. Hey, David, David is asking, how does the process team interact with the process owners?
So the process team does interact directly with process owners. Um, we are fairly new in our process management journey, so defining process owners is sometimes a challenge. So we work, when we get into a process engagement, we're okay, who's the process owner? And making sure that that process owner is also at the right level. Because if it's not the person who does the process, right? It's the person who can influence the process and make change and remove barriers. So
You used the word embedded when you were defining how your organization is working. You're embedded into the IT team. Does that mean you often get embedded into specific projects to focus on? So, for example, if you're working on a new transformation effort, they would embed someone from your team to help assist with the definition of the process and to identify who the process owner is, what the policies need to be, et cetera.
yeah, that's slowly happening as we bring new software online, and a lot of the new projects are going to come from the process team. So
Great. Moving on to the next question. Can you share some insight on the evolution of process management? So it's slightly different than the reporting, but let's
Mhm.
start with saying was there always a focus on process at G3?
There was always a process, focus on being efficient at G3. So G3 started in 2015, as I mentioned, and built the most state-of-the-art facilities imaginable. Um, what happened though is there were a lot of manual processes, particularly at the head office level, to support all of these state-of-the-art facilities. Um, and also because the organization was basically a startup, it was like, wow, we need to, maybe get more formal and on some of our processes. So I was hired in March 2020, so right at the beginning of the pandemic, as the process development manager, and I was basically my own team. And it started out that I was working on a few other things, and it took probably, and we knew this going in, that it would take me about 6 months to get to process. But the original idea was, well, we're going to get you to document all the processes, and maybe you'll have some ideas on how to fix them. The evolution of that quickly was we added a consultant to work on the process team with me as well. We moved from simply documenting processes to trying to get recommendations, to this year we've actually added 3 process analysts and a business analyst to our team, so we can do a couple things. We can work shadow, we can sit with the people who are actually doing the job, as well as have the ability to move some of these things forward. So if you think about it, given that there was a pandemic, we're actually moving pretty quickly. I've only been at G3 for 2 years, and the process evolution has moved along pretty quickly.
Now, I mean, knowing a little bit of your background, maybe we can share some of that with the audience, but you've come into G3 with extensive background and experience in the area of agriculture. Is that correct?
Yeah, I have worked in agriculture since my entire career, so since 1998, in various positions. I started in a few different accounting teams, moved to IT as a business analyst, then a project manager, then an IT manager, and so on and so on. And I wanted to uh, move from focusing simply on IT and IT projects to actually looking at process improvement, call it, and making things better for people. So that's been my progression.
So given all that experience you have, was it hard? Was it difficult for the organization to let you focus on process? Were they trying to pull you back into other
Yeah.
things?
So that's why I spent the first 6 months. I spent the first 6 months on a different project. And so basically, the only thing I actually did on the process side was to identify a process management software, which was Navvia. Um, and really, it took a while so I started in March 2020. It was probably September 2020 till like started dipping my toes in process, maybe 50%, and slowly pulling myself out of that.
Mhm.
That said, as a member of the leadership team too, I'm always kind of pulled in slightly different directions when it comes
Sure.
to escalations and stuff. But I would say, I'm 80% at least process these days.
But given that experience, I mean, how important do you believe that experience was to your ability to lead these process initiatives?
Mm. Um, it helped a lot. Walking in with at least, I feel sorry. I have empathy for new people who start in the organization, or contractors who walk in and they have no idea how our business works. Because, you walk into a bank or you walk into an insurance company, you kind of know what they do at least, right?
Mhm.
Whereas here, it's like, how exactly does this work? So one of the things I did very early on, the first consultant we hired, is I put together a how agribusiness works slide deck to show them like how our business works at a super high level what we do so that people at least have that context. And I've always been a firm believer of help people understand how the business works enough so that they at least have an idea of what they're trying to do. Um, and so that's been very important as well. And also because we were in a pandemic and I couldn't travel and I couldn't sit with people, convincing people I knew what they were talking about was super important. So
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you mentioned how introducing people into an organization. I've always thought that process was one of the best. Having
mm,
well-defined and documented processes is a great way of bringing people on board because it really shows them at a high level, what it is the organization it does and how work flows through the organization. And you can't get that from procedures, right? Procedures are
no,
just way too in the weeds to be able to do that.
yeah.
Hey, I have a question here from Matt. Hey, Matt. So Matt's asking, how do you identify which is most valuable to the business for process improvement? It's a two-part question, so I'll let you answer the first part.
I will look at G3's strategy and where we're trying to go, um, and look at that. So that's a primary thing. Does it align with our strategy and what we're trying to do? Um, aside, um, something to think about on the side though is that process improvement and efficiency happens 5 minutes at a time. So
Hmm.
you kind of have to do, well, maybe not 5 minutes time, but and it adds up. So if you can save someone half an hour, 5 minutes, and only spend a couple of grand, you might do that, even though maybe it's not nothing's gonna, there's no fireworks going off and that kind of thing. But doing that incrementally and saving little bits of time can be helpful. So that was actually part of the business case for bringing on the 3 process analysts was, hey, we are we're going to be able to do this in bits, right? And so shadowing people is important, and looking at how we can incrementally help people automate with low cost solutions is really important. And it's hard to do that with, always having to buy a software or have an external vendor. So if we can help people find simple ways to automate things or simple to us ways to automate things, that's part of the plan as well.
So sort of back to Matt's question. So not everything has to be a big bang project and
Exactly.
strategically directed. This sort of low-hanging fruit can also be a great way of demonstrating the value of process improvement.
Yeah. Exactly.
Matt went on to ask also, and that how do you harness the different stakeholders once you identify something you want to focus on? How do you bring all the stakeholders together so that you can get the most value out of the improvement? Is it
Mm.
easy to get these people together? I know back in the day when I was doing this kind of work, sometimes it's really hard to get people to come to workshops and meetings and interviews around process, right?
It really is. And some of that I've been learning has been influencing at an individual level and at the right level. Um, so yeah, it has been really hard to get everybody in a workshop. So I probably stopped trying for the most part. We will have, we'll take the hit on the time and we might have 3 meetings about the same thing. So with 3 different people. There's an upside to that too, though, because if you have a smaller group or you have just the person by themselves or 2 people, they might be more honest
Mhm.
about where they're at. Um, so when I'm trying to influence change, I've found, rather than having a big bang meeting, um, you have to have the big bang meeting at some point to everybody agree. But usually by the time that meeting happens, I've already had conversations to know I have alignment. So I've talked to, this
Mhm.
person, and I know they agree. And I know who influences the process, or I know who influences the other people, who, I know if I have person X's support, even if I haven't talked to the VP they report to yet, Well, they really put a lot of stake in what their staff thinks. So if their staff agrees with me, then we're already pretty much there. So um, it's some work to influence people, and yeah, to be
But
honest, people aren't automatically going to show up to my process meeting no matter how much they like me. So
But I think what you're doing though is to show the shows that you're listening to them, right? By having these
mhm,
individual conversations, by validating back that you've listened and repeating back what you've said. This is building the trust, right? That allows you to execute effectively in your job.
mhm.
Just Matt had one final comment. Maybe I'll let you comment on it. So G3 practices a blend of continual improvement plus larger structured process improvement initiatives.
Exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. Veronica has the question, how did the virtual world impact your team's work?
Yeah, I am so glad I had experience in agriculture before I started at G3, 6 days before starting to work completely remotely.
Yeah,
Um, so
seriously.
yeah, I started March 2nd, and then 6 days later we were all remote. 6 business days.
Yeah.
Um, and it was crazy. And I already have relationships, within the industry. I already
Mhm.
knew like 4 or 5 of the people I was working with. That was super helpful. Um, I don't know if it's about process specifically, but I would say even now, um, my team, except for one person, is remote, meaning not in the office. So we meet every day, every morning and it's a check-in. And really, there are some business talk in that, but also it's water cooler talk, right? Because we
Mhm.
still need that. We still need to develop relationships, and you have to be more intentional about doing that when you're online. So you don't just pass by someone on your way to the washroom or a meeting or whatever. You have to be intentional about managing those relationships, and I have been um, throughout this last 2 and some bit years, very intentional about reaching out and maintaining relationships on a personal and professional level, because that is super important.
Definitely. Like
Yeah.
we did something very similar when the pandemic hit. We were, because of the nature of our business, we're all IT folks, so we were able to go virtual like at a drop of a hat, right?
Right.
So we did the morning check-in basically, and it was, I would say it was 90% water cooler talk and 10%
Hmm.
business, because you needed to keep a social contact with people when you couldn't meet face to face. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's great that you're able to do that.
Yeah. I will back up a little bit. I'm wondering now, Veronica asked that. I remember I said I ditched the idea of workshops. I think part of that was because that is super hard to do virtually.
Mhm.
If we were all in a room, it might be easier to get engagement, but doing it one-on-one virtually or in much smaller groups virtually was the way to go.
Great. So moving on to the next question. So based on my experience in my career, because I've been involved in process pretty much my entire career, primarily in the IT sector. But I've always believed that process is the blueprint for automation and digital transformation. If you're implementing a new workflow automation tool, let's say like a an IT ticketing system like a ServiceNow or Sharewell or many of the products out there, you have two options. You can just like slam the tool in and focus on a piece of technology, or you can say, what is it we're trying to improve, and then use that to drive. So what's your perspective on the linkage between business process management and technology at G3?
Um, right from the beginning of when I started at G3, um, the my manager at the time, who is now our chief financial officer, said, when we do projects, we need to know what problem we're solving. So I don't want to hear about I'll use Navvia as an example because it was one of the software we brought on. Um, you can't call that the Navvia project. It's not the Navvia project, right? It's the business process management process or project. Um, so we always start with what's the business problem you're trying to solve, and always coming back to that. It's really important to get clarity on what you're trying to do and clarity on where you're trying to go. So a current state, a future state. Um, that is really important in my mind. I am trying to influence the rest of our technology organization to think process first and to actually use process to design the software. We're not quite there yet. But definitely, and the other thing is if you show someone a picture of what you're trying to do, that tells picture's worth 1,000 words. That tells the story like nothing else will.
So in terms of the automation projects, was process ever perceived as a dirty word when it came to, you know, the projects that you're working on?
Uh, anything, so our technology team is an agile team.
Mhm.
So anything that slows them down bugs them, right? They're like, no, we need velocity. We got to go. And it's like, we got to figure out how this works first. So there was actually a huge pull or a huge evolution to start doing a little bit of analysis before you try and develop stuff. I think we're there now. I think,
Mhm.
we do a lot more analysis on how this is going to work. What are the steps? What are the uh, uh, what's the impact of this change on our folks? And we're working, now that for up until January, it was me and one other person. Now we have more capacity. We are actually getting more involved in that. We have a project coming up where process analysts are getting into the software, seeing how it works, and giving some recommendations, not just to change the software, to say, hey, if you want people to change their behavior and start using this software, here's what you need to consider.
One of the linkages between process and technology is user stories. Does your team get involved in the writing of the user stories that drive the requirements for the automation?
So we've had one major project come out of process analysis so far, remembering we're only 2 years old.
Mhm.
And that project, we did we being the current process team, did the original user stories for that. And that became the basis of their user stories. Of course, I don't think of everything. So those user stories changed considerably. But we created the original user stories. Yeah.
That's good. And was that beneficial because these user stories were actually mapped back to the process?
Hmm. Yeah, that's exactly it's and one of the ways that isn't exactly process even that I tend to use diagramming for too is thinking through the steps, like the logical steps, which is more like a procedure, which I don't want to get into, but if you can really use diagramming software to go, okay, user clicks here, here's the story. User clicks here, here's the story. And we did a bunch of that quite a few times. Yeah.
Is there a lot, you've mentioned the word procedure here. Sometimes there's a big confusion between process and procedure. Was that something you had to address?
It's something I still have to address. We when I came in, I think people thought I was going to rewrite all their procedures.
Hmm.
And it was interesting because some of them I probably could write because I've been around a lot. I know the software they're using. Um, but really, that is not what a process analyst does. The process analyst looks at the how, or sorry, the what. I got it backwards. The what. Other, procedures are the how.
Mhm.
So there's not a lot of value in me figuring out exactly what buttons you push in our software, AgriSoft, to create an invoice. that is something somebody who does that job is probably better equipped to do. So yeah, they were like, oh, okay, well, now you have all these boxes. Are you going to write the procedures on how to do this? Nope, no, we're not. That's not the value. And you can't, people would be like, oh, I have all this documentation. Here you go. And they're all procedures, which are fantastic. But I find it's really hard to glean what exactly you're trying to do from a procedure
Mhm.
if you don't have any context.
Right. It's so deep into the weeds. I mean, and it doesn't show it how it connects to other people's work, right?
Hmm.
So one of the big ways to improve processes is understanding the cycle time of the process so you can decompose it and look for areas of opportunities for improvement. And you can't do that looking at individual procedures. You got to see
Right.
how does that procedure maybe affect the input of to another process, or how an output from a process might affect what you need to do. But you can't glean that from the procedure level. You have to have the
Hmm.
interconnected processes documented.
Yeah. And if you, as somebody who does one of these procedures, it's super helpful for you to understand what happens next, if particularly when you're not responsible for that. So you know how your outputs impact other people. And that's really important.
Mhm. Yeah, for example, if you don't get that, if your piece of work isn't finished in a certain by a certain time, you might miss the cycle for it to be
Hmm.
processed by the downstream person,
Yeah.
right? And that could slow things down, that could affect productivity, and
Yeah.
and you don't know that unless you see the whole end-to-end process. And that's why process is
Mhm.
important. You need to see how the work
Yeah.
flows through the entire
Yeah.
organization, not just
And
on
I,
the desk.
I can't fix a procedure without looking at the entire process either, right? Because I'm
Right.
like, oh, well, why are you filling out all these fields? It seems, well, it goes into a next stage in the process, right? Yes, this field is irrelevant to you, but it feeds all this stuff the next step up. You have to understand the whole process. So,
But again, I think there really is this very strong relationship between process and the implementation of technology, especially
mhm.
with digital transformation. And, we've seen just from research that we've done, up to 80% of digital transformation projects end in failure. And a lot of that is because nobody's taking the time to understand where they are and where they're planning to go. They just jump right into the technology. Um, we have a question here from Veronica. Veronica's asking, do you find that process owners sometimes have difficulties defining process outputs or outcomes?
Yep.
That's the short
Particu-
answer.
Particularly when it's like, well, what's the goal of this process? What are your goals and objectives? Oh, no, no. Just we have to do it. Okay, yeah, but are you wanting to do it fast? Are we wanting to do it with less people? Are we wanting to do it more accurately? What are the outcomes you're looking for?
Mhm. And
Yeah.
it's interesting because, so again, in at Navvia, we were process consultants for many years, right? Before we came up with the Navvia software. And prior to that, many of us were process consultants before we joined,
Hmm.
we formed Navvia. And the interesting thing there was, there was always this, you'd see so much. So you'd walk into an organization, you see their processes, and it would be as simple as a couple of flowcharts, and
Hmm.
with no, why are we doing this? How are we governing this? How are we measuring this? Just, well, here it is. Here's what we're doing. And again, when you looked at it closely, a lot of times it was really more of a procedure than it was a process. And
Hmm.
you can't improve something unless you know why you're doing it, right? And what
Yeah.
your goal is. So, back to Veronica's question, I think it's really important to have those goals understood. But I mean, do you see yourself being part of the education process?
Oh, for sure. And um, it's fortunate again that I have enough experience in the industry that I can help kind of lead them to what their goals might be
Mhm.
or what the point might be. Um, but again, that can kind of make me skip a few steps and helping people, but in encouraging people to think through why are we doing this? What do we need to come out of it? that's a big thing. What I was going to say, I find a lot of what I end up doing too is helping people take a step back and look at what's actually going on
Mhm,
in different processes and things that are happening, and really understand, like, one person will say, oh, well, you can't do this because this is the rule. It's like, okay, well, why is that the rule? Let's talk to the person who makes that rule. Well, that person doesn't necessarily have the context for everything that's going on.
mhm.
So being able to ask questions and look at things somewhat objectively is really helpful, and that's a huge part of my role, is like, okay, let's take a step back and think about this.
You got me thinking about another aspect. Um, in a lot of organizations, they leave it to the individual process owners, process managers to develop their process. But I've always thought there's a certain skill or an art or a science to process development and process design. Um, and that there's probably, sure, you can fix your own sink or fix your own plumbing, but it's probably better to bring a plumber in to do that if it's a complex
Mhm.
job. And do you see, basically, just in your experience, do you find that sometimes um, there was a resistance to bring expert skills in to do process work? I know I'm not talking so much from G3's perspective, because your team has been growing, which is a good sign of success.
Mhm.
But just in general, do you think that there's a problem in that area?
I do think there's a problem in that area, and in my prior uh, role at a different company, I think that's part of the reason why I moved on, because they weren't really ready to really look at process and process improvement and that kind of thing.
Mhm,
They were willing to improve procedures, but actually having a structured uh, role and group of people who would look at processes and changing them,
mhm.
um, that's something G3 has embraced fairly quickly.
Right, because there's skills to interview people, there's skills to do a workshop, there's skills to mapping a
Mhm.
process, even something as simple as process notation. You get 5 people, and 5 people will document a process differently using different symbols, or
Yeah.
just simple things like how a process is flowing. They have it kind of going backwards, because they're just not following structured or best practices in the way of documenting process. So I think that there is a big role for someone who has experience in and especially expertise in process design. Matt, and also we have something from David here, but Matt was asking, and again, just as you said, G3 is a relative startup compared to a lot of organizations. But Matt goes on to say that in Misty's introduction, she mentioned that G3 loading trains with grain was much faster than the Canadian industry average. Um, so he was asking, is it what was the process team's role in that? And I think you kind of came in after they started up, right?
I did, and honestly, that is mostly due to the state-of-the-art facilities and the way they're able to just load the grain faster. Yeah.
But I imagine process engineers got involved with building those facilities, I would think. I mean, maybe not so much your team, but in the building of those facilities, process was
There was a lot
obviously.
of, yeah, so there was a lot of thought put into the design of those facilities, and making them state of the art, and then being able to leverage the learnings from that first facility and continue to build on that.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's a lot of thought that went into the design of those facilities for sure.
But in terms of the focus on your team, are you focused, what kind of projects are you focusing on now? You mentioned a new
Um,
software that went in.
Yeah, across the organization. So
Yeah.
the first 2 years was mainly what I'd call head office, but that was because of the pandemic, right? So we focused on our trading our trading um, not software, but our trading processes, our accounting processes, that kind of thing. And now we're expanding into the actual operations, and we'll be visiting sites and kind of looking at what they do, and taking the most advanced of those facilities, learning from that too, and seeing what changes could be scalable across the whole organization.
So now you're going back actually and looking at that technology and looking at ways to optimize the processes that support it.
Yeah.
David is asking, what, if any, certifications does your process team emphasize?
I don't know if there are certifications for process
Business
analysts.
analyst
Yeah.
certification?
So uh, we took the idea that it was better to have people who had some experience in our industry and train them how to do process analysis and some of the technical stuff. So what we've done is we have one person who has a traditional business analyst background, and that's the consultant we hired. But also, um, the three new process analysts actually came from our elevator operations. So they have experience on the ground about how those things work, but we chose them for their creativity and, I say tech savvy, but somewhat tech savviness, attention to detail, wanting to make things better. We found people across the organization that wanted to learn those broader skill set than they could get in their own locations. So that's the way we went. Is we're taking people who don't necessarily have that training, but definitely have the skills required to do that.
Cool. I'm going to move on to the next question, Misty. What are some of the challenges you faced in your time at G3?
Well, other
Process
than
related,
the
obviously.
global pandemic, yeah,
Well, there you go.
yeah. Um, so I think we've talked about the process versus procedure thing to death.
Mhm,
Um, but that was a big one. Um, Another one was again transitioning from saying, "Oh, this is um, you know, here's the process. We've diagrammed it. Let's post it." To, well, here's some ideas. How to do this. And when I look at it, like honestly, like I mean, I have business analyst experience, but I didn't know how to do this. We're still figuring it out, right? Um, so uh, finding information about what a business process should be. And a lot of the business process stuff that's out there is very IT centric. So we're like,
mhm,
no, we're looking at actual business processes. Um, Another challenge we got was everybody, once we started doing the recommendations, we actually structure them in three parts. So one of them is recommendations for things you can do today without new technology, and then recommendations with new technology, which probably costs money, right? And then reporting recommendations. And then we would track all of the recommendations. So the recommendations that they could do without new technology, should be implementable within a reasonable amount of time. But you go back to people and they're like, yeah, I haven't had time to work on that. Yeah, I haven't done that. So actually moving from recommendation to done
mhm.
um, is something we're putting more focus on as we move through the organization, building accountability to say, you said this was a good idea. Are we doing it? How are we moving forward? And in the last few months, I've actually seen a lot of growth in that as well, actually moving things forward and making some of those non technical recommendations come to fruition. Um, People who are, we're lean like probably a lot of other people.
Mhm.
So it's not like the people have 50% of their job to make these changes. So our perspective is let's help them. Let's help them move them forward in doing the things we're good at, like organizing meetings, reminding people, that kind of like simple things, right? Of, oh, well, let's talk about this. Let's talk about the impact. Let's do a new diagram. So helping people move those things forward is our current my my current
Focus, I guess,
focus.
or yeah.
Yeah.
I guess the fact that building these relationships and demonstrating value really helps overcome some of these challenges as well, I would
Hmm.
imagine. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would be some of the bigger successes that you've seen over the time that you've been growing this group?
Um, well, I think the biggest one is the fact that we have the group. We
Mhm.
went from just me to five people, six people, including me. Um, like that is huge. We uh, we provided enough value that the organization said, yes, you can hire 4 more people in 2022.
Wow.
So that has been amazing. We have our first software recommendation that we made is going live right now ish. And so that's really cool to see that come to fruition. And that was a decent sized spend and investment that they made based on our recommendations.
Mhm.
Um, and there's lots of, you know, little wins for me of like having to go back to different process recommendations repeatedly because I really think they'll help to see those finally implemented feels really good, or to have somebody go finally go, oh, I get it. Okay, yeah, let's do that. Or yeah, this isn't as big of a deal as I'm making it. Um, that has been huge. So there's lots of wins and lots of exciting things going on.
It sounds like you've got some good momentum as
Hmm.
well, right? So things are
Yeah.
moving in the right direction, which is awesome. Um, I just have a comment back from David, just might to share with everyone on the call here today. Um, so he was complimentary that your team has a lot of good experience in the industry. He was just throwing out that you might want to consider the certified process design engineer.
Oh, okay.
There's a designation. I think I've heard of that one as well. So maybe we can forward you some information on that, as well as some Lean Six Sigma as possible options for certifications for your team if you're looking to
Yeah.
do that.
I did do some Lean Six Sigma in my previous role.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that is something I would like to investigate a little bit more. It's kind of interesting though, because what we do, um, Lean Six Sigma works really well in manufacturing and things where you do things a lot. There's hardly that many repeatable processes that we can get to that level of precision. Um, but it's a really good thing to think about. And yeah,
Well, especially looking at cycle time and looking at those sort of
yeah,
things. And before we get on to the next question, Veronica um, also commented that it sounds like you're incorporating a lot of change. And by change management, I believe Veronica means organizational change
yeah,
management techniques in your implementations. Is that a big part of what your team does, is help with that organizational change?
sure is. And it's going to become more of a focus for our team, but it's been a huge part of my role is helping people think of the change, helping people roll out the change, helping people with their training. Because we're a small organization, like we don't have a dedicated training team. We do have a communications team, but when people think about like what is this change, what is the impact to people. I saw the question about how I sell up to execs.
Mhm.
um, Generally, I rely on the executive I report to kind of do some of that talking to people, but I'll do it as well. Again, I said we're a very lean organization, or a flat organization, so walking into any of the execs office is not a problem for me. And building that trust with them and say we really need we really need to do this. Here's what I'm thinking. And having really good conversations about why people are resistant to certain things. I really appreciate that about the organization, is I can get real answers to that. It's like, well, why, what am I sensing here? What's the really the issue? So,
So obviously having the flat organization and that access is really important. But I guess
mhm,
but I guess that also speaks to anyone involved in process. You do need a good level of sponsorship in the organization because it is cross-functional. It does involve so many people, and it's very hard to do, it within one department or one domain.
for sure.
Um, the last question for today, I believe, is just talking about some lessons learned, not only from your time at G3, but just over your career. Is there anything, in respect to business process management that you'd like to share in terms of lessons learned?
Mhm. Um, you know, we talk about process improvement and blah, blah. And really, process management is not about making people into robots. It is not about um, bureaucracy. It's really about, and my goal in life, both professionally and personally, is always I want people who have had an interaction with me to be able to say their life is better because of it somehow.
Mhm.
Um, so I really approach things from an empathy level of I understand uh, what you're where you're coming from. I understand what you're doing and what you're wanting to do. We're on the same side here, and that is hugely important um, for me to have empathy for what people are doing. I've also learned that, and I'm working on this, of how to help people who haven't been doing this for 24 years, to figure out how the industry works, figure out what's happening, so they can bring in that knowledge into a meeting as well.
Mhm.
Um, I can kind of, I can probably go into most meetings and figure out what's happening in the industry, kind of thing. Not everybody can do that. You're going to get quickly overwhelmed, but helping people understand that has been huge. And I have had a lot more success by helping people understand that I'm on their side. I'm not there to tell them what to do. I'm there to help them figure out what to do.
That's excellent. I really resonate with your comment on empathy. Are you familiar with a concept called design thinking?
No,
So
maybe.
you probably it's very agile, but it's the way a lot of modern products are designed, and it's sort of a creative approach, a sort of approach to designing products. But the thing about design thinking is it starts with empathy. That's the very
Mm.
first, um,
Oh, cool.
and and there was a great example of it. They were talking about a project where this design company was brought in to basically redesign some processes within a hospital. Everything from how they do MRIs on small children, and all kinds of different processes
Mhm.
of the triage and whatnot. And one of the first things they tried to do is get empathy for the people who are involved. Like, you have to remember, they would say, the people are coming in here worried about cancer, worried about a loved one, worried about
Mhm.
um, you know a diagnosis they just received. And without empathy, it's really hard to solve the problem because you really want to put yourself in the
Mhm.
shoes. So empathy for all the personas, all the different business personas that make up the process is critical, because if you don't empathize with them, how are you going to solve their problem? So I really resonated with that
Mhm.
comment on empathy. So thanks for sharing that. So we're coming up to the end of today's webinar. I want to thank you very much, Misty, for being a part.
Thank
I've
you.
really enjoyed today's conversation. We will open it up to any additional questions. We have a few minutes left. So if there are any additional questions, we'd be happy to take those. I'll just keep an eye on the chat panel. But there've been a fair number of questions throughout the
Mhm.
session here today.
Yeah, I
Um,
really, I really appreciate the engagement. Thanks, everybody.
yeah, I just to wrap things up, just a couple of things. And I'll keep an eye on the discussion board. First of all, we will be sending a copy of this out to everybody, the slides as well as the recording. And it'll be the recording will be posted, so you could share the recording with others if that's something you'd like to do. We do have other webinars coming up. I'll talk to those in just a moment. Just a little bit about us, though. The Navvia Process Designer really can be a helpful tool for people involved in business process management. It has a lot of capabilities to help you with the design and sharing of processes, of developing user stories and requirements. So mapping those stories right back to the process, assessment and governance to make sure that you go into a process design initiative by assessing where you are today and by giving you some tools to help govern the process after it's been implemented. The product comes loaded with IT and business process templates, everything from service desk processes all the way to HR onboarding processes. So lots of great starting templates within the product. And all of that together really helps improve the productivity of your process teams, helps with some cost savings by allowing you to implement better through better requirements, better process, better user stories. And the product's also a tremendous value in the way it's priced, and our pricing is very transparent, available on our website. If any of you would like to get an in-depth demonstration of how Navvia can help your business process team, just respond to the email that'll be coming out with the recording, and we'd be happy to schedule a live demo for you. But we won't be going into the product at all today. I do want to talk about the next event that we're going to be doing on April 21st. We're going to have a really interesting conversation with New York City Health and Hospitals. New York City Health and Hospitals is the largest hospital system in the state of New York. And we're going to be talking about the importance of enterprise change management from an IT perspective, not organizational change management, but enterprise IT change management, and why it needs to be done at an enterprise level when you have so many moving parts in a large organization like New York City Health and Hospitals. So looking forward to that conversation. We're going to be speaking with a gentleman, Anthony Salvo. Anthony has just tremendous experience in the area of change management from working with companies like the New York Stock Exchange. He was did change management at the New York Stock Exchange. And for those of you who know anything about the New York Stock Exchange, you don't want to have a change affect the opening. Yeah, you want that bell to ring in the morning, right? So he knows a thing or two about enterprise change management. So we're looking forward to that discussion. And I think that's it for today. Thank you. We got some nice comments coming in from Katie and from Veronica and from David and others. So thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. And Misty, once again, thanks so much. I really enjoyed
Thank you. It was an honor.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.